Okay, so I guess this would be chapter 2. I get a little air in my seat so you can see me a little bit better. So now I have made the decision. My I believe statement, my drive out to see Ritz was, he has to tell me. Like, I needed the horse to tell me. He has to pick me. So now I've made the decision. Now what? I don't have the money. I live in a lake community where there are no barns to board a horse at. I have no place to take him if I can afford him, etc., etc. But I don't know. Something says I got to do this. What do I have? So then you go through your mind. Like, what do I have to sell that would get me the money now, right? Well, the only thing I had to sell was my car. I didn't have 2 cars. I had that car. I talked to the owner of the farm, who was also the fellow who was responsible for Ritz's ownership at that time, and said, can I park my car at the barn? Because of the visibility that it would get, it would probably sell quite quickly. Like I said, when Bernie was keeping Eddie away from me, she was at a stop sign that dead-ended right at the barn, so people that came down that road would hit that stop sign, and they'd have no choice but to see my car. I think in 2 days, my car sold. I stood there with the guy buying my car, counting the cash that he gave me, and turned to Jerry, which was the guy's on my right shoulder, Jerry's on my right shoulder, turned to Jerry, counted out all that money, back to Jerry, which afforded me the purchase of Ritz, as well as board for, several months in advance, because he was still standing with his mom. He still had to stay there, so that was my boarding facility at first. So all is well. Like I fought a horse. I don't remember the whole details about how I acquired another car, but I did not have a car at the time that I made the decision to sell my car. I just sold my car because I had to have this horse. Didn't even know how I was going to get there to go visit him because I didn't have a car once my car was sold. But anyway, so now the group of us from the barn all go to an auction. Now here's my next breadcrumb. We go to the auction for the tack auction aspect of it. We didn't go look at other horses. So we all went as a group, and prior to the tack auction, we walk around and see all the horses that are going to be run through the auction because we were there early. And I had come across the stall with 3 little chestnut babies that were 4 months old, I was told. Upon the inquiry, I also found out that they were solid paints. So they were registered stock baby horses, but because they didn't have any white on them, they didn't have the same value to the breeder, so they just brought them there to get rid of them. Broke my heart seeing these tiny little babies, but it also gave me a light bulb. What if I was to find babies at an auction and train them and put them out in the world as horses that were trained by Kirsten, the time Riley? Wouldn't that be kind of a cool adventure for me as part of my new future, right? Totally 18 years ago, totally just something that crossed my mind. That's a breadcrumb, though. That's a breadcrumb. Go through the auction, just a funny story. I was buying everything green because I believe chestnuts are supposed to wear green. And even as I was purchasing everything green, there was one point where something green was being auctioned off, but it wasn't, either it didn't appeal to me or it wasn't appropriate for Ritz, whether it was for size or I just didn't like what it was. So the lady behind me, total stranger, leans over, taps me on the shoulder and says, "You're not going to bid on that? It's green." Another funny story about that too is while one of the things we were bidding on was sitting there up for bid, my girlfriend Dawn and I were the only 2 people driving up the price. for something I wanted. It didn't occur to me at first because this is my first experience ever at an auction, so it didn't occur to me what was happening. But literally, she was bidding because she got caught up in the experience. I was bidding because I got caught up in the experience and I wanted what we were bidding on. But nobody was bidding against us. I paid more money for something just because Dawn and I were having our moment in this experience. I later learned that those babies sold, I think the most expensive one sold for $275, the cheapest one sold for $125. 4 babies, 4 months old. They were worthless to a breeder because they didn't have any white on them. But it stayed in my mind as an opportunity to buy babies in the future and raise them to be horses that I can then put it back out to the world with great foundations on them and have them have my name on them. Therefore, with my name on them, they can, like if you hear of a clinician that you're like, oh, Clinton Anderson, for example. Like if you heard that was a Clinton Anderson trained horse, it would have more value to you just by the name. So I was kind of hoping I could create something like that for myself. And that was in the back of my mind 18 years ago. Fast forward 2 years, and I buy Katie, who I bought from a breeder, but she's a solid paint bred. I bought her from a paint breeder. She lacks the color also, thinking I was going to do the same thing. I did get a good price. It was not quite as good as the auction price, but I also bought her straight from a breeder, which I appreciated a little bit more than somebody dumping them in an auction house. She has a little bit of a personality that makes her a horse that I think would get hit often, because she does have a personality where I believe that if she thought she could, she would calculate revenge. And I didn't want anybody to hurt this horse. So she's 14 or 15 years old now, and she's still mine. So that didn't work out. That whole, I'm going to start a baby, and I'm going to send the baby out in the world being my signature trained baby. That didn't work out. Okay, so that's kind of chapter 2, because I want to be a little more elaborate on the next chapter, which is a road trip I took with Bernie, and my exposure to natural horsemanship and the reality that people pay to be taught how to play with horses. So stay tuned for that part. I knew nothing about natural horsemanship. So stay tuned for chapter 3.